Hello, everybody. My name is Todd. I'm a grateful follower of Jesus Christ who celebrates victory over meth, heroin, alcohol, and homelessness. I'm gonna. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm kind of nervous, so I'll start out fast. I'll get into it, and then I'll slow down after my nerves kind of. But I am going to open us up in prayer. Dear Father, I humbly come before you tonight, and I ask that my words touch anybody and everybody in this audience. Open their hearts and minds to you, Lord, and let them hear you, not me. Amen. So, while I was in active addiction, my life was completely unmanageable. I had believed the lies that I was nothing more than a failure. I was a burden to those around me. I was unloved. I was never accepted and only tolerated due to people feeling sorry for me. I believed in God, but knew He hated me. My life seemed like one punishment or trauma after another. Whenever my life started to look up, finally getting past any major trauma, another would strike like clockwork. And now I've lost my place because I'm moved. There we go. The largest trauma I experienced was losing my 2-month-old daughter to SIDS in July of 2017. I interpreted this as a punishment from God. This trauma and not knowing how to deal with it led to my heroin addiction. The more my addictions grew, the more I lost my sense of purpose and any hope that things could get better. Suicide was the only clear path of escape that I could see in the midst of all these lies. My fear that suicide would lead to hell and I would never get into heaven to see those I loved that passed away subsided as I rationalized all my trauma as punishment for God. With this lie sinking in, I figured there was no way that if God hated me this much on earth, I was ever going to be led into heaven anyway. I picked a suicide date of 3/18/20. I picked this date as I thought it was far enough from all holidays. My death would not impact my family more than it already would. I grew up in a home of addicts and had no stability. I was passed between family members to try and hide me from my parents. My siblings and I were subject to physical, emotional, and spiritual abuse on a regular basis by our mother. She was a meth addict and was either angry or absent. When I was 9, my mom and stepdad had a baby girl. My oldest little sister, who was 2 years younger than I, and myself helped raise our baby sister, as our stepdad was out of town working and our mother was constantly absent. We quickly learned how to change diapers and make bottles as best we could for 9 and 7. During this time, the rest of our family had stopped checking on us as much. They thought my mom was sober since she had just had a baby. In one sense, this was much better than having to stay with our grandparents who were alcoholics or our aunt and uncle's house, as he sexually abused me from the time I was 4 until I was 19 when I was too drunk to fight him off of me. I was treated like and told I did not matter for most of my childhood. My mother quit meth and picked up drinking when I was around 11 or 12. Around this time, I started to see my dad on a regular basis. I thought I may finally have some stability with him and be loved and accepted. I pushed hard to move in with him and finally got my way after much abuse and torment from my mother. This soon turned out to be much less safe than I imagined. Although he was sober and everything seemed good from the outside looking in, I soon realized that my dad was not safe either. He was verbally and physically abusive to everyone in the house and had no qualms breaking noses or ribs for a dirty house or any type of backtalk or disrespect. I soon started to bounce from home to home, taking as much abuse as I could before leaving. My options were between my mom, my dad, my aunt and uncle. I would stay as long as I could, stand the abuse, and flee to one of the others. During my childhood, while living with my mom, questions about religion, God, or asking to go to church with friends and anything of the sort would almost always induce a violent reaction from her. According to my mom, all Christians are hypocrites. We were all going to hell anyways. Her view of God was one that He was a God of punishment and not much else to my knowledge. She blamed God for misery in life and would ridicule Him regularly. When I was with my dad, he had given God credit for getting him sober here and there and would take us to church from time to time. There was never much discussion and certainly no relationship with Jesus that was ever talked about nor instilled into my siblings or myself. Church was more of a keeping up appearances, and mornings were always miserable before church. The whole family would fight while being rushed out the door, and it would continue on the way. Once we were close to church, we had to act as if we were the happiest family there. As a young man, I had no real idea of what God was like. The only things I had ever been taught were that He was an all-seeing and full of punishment, and no matter what I would ever do, I would end up in hell. And church had almost always been a miserable experience. Once I joined the Army at 17, I would go to services on Sundays to get out of extra cleaning and the chance of getting smoked. I began to enjoy this time on Sundays, and until recently, those 14 weeks of basic training in AIT were the most consistency I ever had with church. I remember enjoying the music as an escape from all the hard work we were putting in, yet I never remembered the message. Once in my duty station, I rarely went to church. I had a small relationship with our chaplain that was anything but consistent. Although I believed, I still had no concept of a relationship with Christ. God was still this mysterious yet vengeful man in the sky whose purpose was to punish us sinners. Once deployed, I saw my faith as nothing more than a safety net for what I saw as my inevitable death during combat. I had become bitter. The more I experienced war, the more I lost my faith in humanity and started to cement the idea of God as one who was severely punishing me or a worthless creator that let these atrocities happen with zero intervention. I despised this version of God that I had created in my mind. I had zero interest or intention of having a relationship with God, knowing He could stop this at any time, and the casualties of war were all around me. My attitude towards others varied on what substance I was on. When drinking, I was either a social butterfly and happy-go-lucky or a blubbering, violent idiot who wanted to commit suicide. Each time I drank, it was like flipping a coin, and the longer I flipped the coin, the more I seemed to be suicidal. Looking back on it, I had been an alcoholic since my first drink at 15. I had always drank to black out and seemed to always be a menace to myself. I was your typical binge drinker that would go months between drinking sprees, so there's no way I was an alcoholic. Those people drink every day. When I was on heroin, I was a pushover that just wanted to stay high as often as possible and isolate myself and run from my pain. I was just emotionally numb enough to avoid suicide. Eventually, this numbness ran out, and I was left with more misery than I already had and wanted a way out. A fellow user told me if I used meth, I would not feel the withdrawals from the heroin. This began the scariest time of my addiction. Meth brought me to a new type of low that was scarier than anything I thought I could ever experience. While on meth, I was very quickly consumed by an ever-growing addiction to porn and isolating myself. When I was not consuming porn, I was terrified that my food and water were being poisoned, that I was being spied on, and many other absurd lies that were reinforced through constant delusions and auditory and visual hallucinations. I became consumed by fear and would go days without eating, sleeping, drinking water, or even moving from my couch. Fear had become my master under this new drug that would eventually bring me to the most broken place inside myself that I had ever experienced. By this time, my two youngest children had been taken by DCS. My oldest was living with her mother. I had no contact with her for almost 2.5 years. I had always wanted to commit suicide and was still under the belief that if I ever killed myself, that I would go straight to hell and never get to see my daughter again. The longer I used, the more tortured I felt. I constantly wanted to stop using and was so mad after each failed attempt. I was a broken man who seemed to crumble more with each passing day. I was hearing and seeing things on a daily basis, the voices constantly belittling me and everything I did. I had no way to escape myself. The very thing I had been using to escape had now turned me against myself to such a point that I just wanted a way out. In these moments of torture, I had begun to think that there was no way I was ever going to get into heaven. God that hated me this much and made each day torture would never let me see paradise or any type of freedom. When I fully believed this lie is when I decided to take my life. I made an IR-15 from an 80% lower as well as a suppressor, so when I finally killed myself, no one would hear it. It was early December when I had finally come to terms with this. I would spend hours holding the single 5.56 round I was going to kill myself with while crying and wishing the pain would stop. I began to withdraw more and more as the date approached. I was not sure if I was going to make it that far. Sometime after I picked this date, my ex-girlfriend came to live with me once again. We had these hopes of getting sober together and getting the kids back. Just like the past, we had no program, no God, and only hate and resentment for each other, especially when coming down. She became more and more violent, and I kept convincing myself I deserved the abuse, and just maybe if I was lucky enough, she would kill me, and I wouldn't have to muster up the courage to do it myself. This led to a dangerous game of pushing her buttons when she was already violent. One day when we were both coming down off meth, somewhere between the blown out lip, broken windows, a door being kicked in, and the TV and phone being smashed, I'd had enough. I gave her the ultimatum: stop hitting me, go back to your dad's, or go to jail. This resulted in a few good punches to the face. In turn, I proceeded to call the cops. I took a few more punches while on the phone, got a nice scratch down the back of my neck. The police showed up, and in this moment, it hit me like a ton of bricks. This is not what my life should be like. After they took her away, I sat in my trailer looking at the wreckage of my life. I asked myself and pondered, how in the world did I get here? I was broken and alone, afraid and ashamed. I had no one to call that would be surprised or even care to help. I had burned all those bridges and lost that trust. So I kept my misery to myself. I turned back to meth to console me yet again. A few days later, I received a text from my sister with a link to this place called The Meadows, and a message that she thought it'd be good for me. I went off. I didn't need a rehab. I wasn't on drugs. I only needed grief counseling, not all that other stuff. I was so full of it, and after all the insulting and hatred I had typed out, her response was what saved my life. Okay, love you. I felt the wind fall out of my sails. The argument I was prepared to have to protect my life was not going to happen. I was perplexed. My sister doesn't take crap from anyone, and that's how she responds. In this moment of confusion, something remarkable happened. I felt loved and cared about. About 6 weeks later, crying, smoking meth, and wanting to escape the prison I was in, I reached out to her, and she assured me they took VA insurance. I called and got the ball rolling. I did meth right up until they came and picked me up. I left for rehab March 14th, 2020, just 4 days before I was supposed to end it all. I packed wet pants, 3 shirts, a punch, a battery to a remote control helicopter that I no longer owned, the wrong kind of phone charger, a wood clamp, no socks or underwear. Apparently, these were essential items for my 45-day stay in rehab. I was still skeptical that rehab would work. After all, no one knows my pain, right? By the way, I had to borrow a lot of stuff when I was in rehab, guys. Not pleasant. In my early recovery, I had to clear the wreckage of my past and all the resentment I had towards God before I could turn to Him. God blessed me in my AA program by having my temporary sponsor, as well as my regular sponsor, be very godly men. I had to get on my knees and pray for the strength to stay sober and the ability to help others, and that was it. As my sponsor put it, I was too stupid and selfish to be able to pray for anything else. I was stuck. I was in a sober living program and could not fire my sponsor, as he was very well known and liked by the house manager. Today, I am thankful for this bit. In my mess, I thought I was all good with a whopping 90 days of sobriety and do my own thing. After all, I made it 90 days, so I got to be doing something right? I was so naive and had an ego and pride problem didn't even know about. Not to mention this thing called codependency. The more I navigated my AA program, the more I began to seek God. I had finished my intensive outpatient treatment, as well as my sober living commitment, and moved back to Parker. There's not much for recovery in Parker, and in a way, this helped me tremendously, as it drove me more and more towards Christ. I experienced CR for the first time in November 2020. One time when I was hooked, Chip night at Hilltop Church in Lake Havasu was an amazing set of worship. At this point, I had been serving by helping set up and tear down church at Parker. Then I was taken to shadow the CR team at Calvary in Lake Havasu. I was impressed and experienced my first small group. I hardly missed a Monday for that whole first year. I started a step study at Covenant and really got to work. CR really addressed my issues in a much deeper and more graceful way. Although I had been sober for some time, this program helped me really live my life. Since attending CR, I have made huge amounts of change. I now have sole custody of my 2-year-old and 5-year-old. And I see my 11-year-old regularly. Started college full-time. I work in behavioral health. I chair the local homeless coalition and started a relationship with a woman who always puts God first and is an absolute prayer warrior. I serve in many capacities at church, one of which is a ministry leader for what will soon be Celebrate Recovery in Parker, Arizona. I have had my ups and downs in recovery. It is still a battle, but the biggest battles I have are won by Christ and Christ alone. Ephesians 4:29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Our words will leave an impact far greater than we can imagine. I have, and at times still, struggle with the way I use words and which words I use. This verse has helped me clean up my language and speak with intent, or just to keep my mouth shut at times. This verse has been a driving force in serving others and my community, as well as going to school to become a counselor. I would like all of us, including the newcomers, to meditate on James 5:16. Therefore, confess your sins to each other so that you may be healed. The prayer of the righteous person is powerful and effective. The power of prayer is something we can and should be gifting each other with often. I would like to thank everybody with that. And, babe, will you come up here? Pretty please.
Are you kidding me?
No, I am not kidding you. Annette,
Okay.
will you marry me? I'm shaking. I love you. I love you, babe. Hi. Thank you, everybody. All right, now I want to pray. May I see your hands? Dear God, I ask that you guide us always towards you, and that you teach me and you guide me in all I do to honor and love your daughter. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen. I love you. All right. I'll take that with me.